So I'm the second affirmative speaker, and I'm going to be extending some of the claims that my partner discussed, and also responding to some of the claims that were mentioned by the negative side. I'm starting with the first claim that the LAPD unnecessarily uses deadly force. It is true, as my partner had discussed, that the number of LAPD shootings is increasing. According to the LA Times, that just in 2015, the LAPD has killed more people than any other law enforcement agency in the United States. They're also using deadly force more heavily instead of considering alternatives. From the LAPD manual, they just said that warning shots shall only be used in exceptional circumstances where it might be reasonably expected to avoid the need to use deadly force. So pretty much what they're saying is that it's more important to, deadly force in most cases is more effective than a warning shot. Also, they haven't looked at other countries that are using alternatives. My partner discussed, she's mentioned Scotland, but other countries such as Britain, Ireland, Norway, Iceland, and New Zealand, officers are unarmed when they are on patrol. Police are only equipped with firearms in special circumstances. It's a strategy that seems to work surprisingly well for these countries. Police officers there have saved lives exactly because they were unable to shoot. This was an article written by Rick Nowak in the Washington Post. The reason that he states that police officers have saved lives because they were unable to shoot, he's saying that the presence of guns kind of escalates the problems. If someone is in the presence of a gun, they may feel threatened themselves and try to act defensively, which may lead to an officer feeling threatened and lead to using deadly force. Rick Nowak continues to say that the practice is rooted in tradition of those countries and the belief that arming the police with guns engenders more gun violence than it prevents. Moving on to our second claim, that the LAPD's current policy fails to restrict unnecessary use of firearms. Thoroughly talked about was the policy is too objective. We leave it up to what is reasonable, and like the negative side had commented on that, there are many conditions that are very reasonable, and you can't predict anything to go a certain way. Everything is up to circumstance. But we also leave it up to the discretion of an officer, which could lead to false reportings of what could have happened. I'd like to use the case of Michael Brown and Officer Wilson in Ferguson, Missouri. Michael Brown was shot in the back, as well as in the front and on his hands. And Officer Wilson had reported that it was because he felt threatened as he was being attacked. But after the whole incident, they looked at Michael Brown was not armed, and he was coming at the officer, but instead of using some type of an alternative, Officer Wilson used the gun as an option. Federal officers concluded that there was no evidence to disprove former Officer Darren Wilson's testimony that he feared for his safety, leading to our argument that the policy is too objective. There were no other witnesses except Michael Brown, and he is not alive anymore. So the only person that we can rely on is Officer Wilson, and we can't say that he was actually afraid or not, because everyone's fears are different. Our third claim, which is that stricter policies will improve LA policing. It would reduce unnecessary deaths caused by LAPD officers if we used other types of alternatives, because we would de-escalate a problem and maybe not deal with so many people dying that weren't armed or weren't an actual imminent threat. The policy says by the LAPD's Department Coordinator Rod Cush that there is nothing that requires us to actually wait and see if the gun, if there is an actual gun or knife. They just rely on their background training and experience with armed suspects. So the policy doesn't require them to wait for a sign. It's just if they feel threatened. I'd like to respond to the claim by my opponent that crime is high. According according to Jody David Armour, a professor of law at USC, and a Soros Justice Senior Fellow at the Open Society Institute Center on Crime, Communities and Culture, there was a time in from 2000 to 2013, where police officers were using a less aggressive policing strategy, and actually at the same time, crime was actually dipping. But crime is currently, in the past couple years, has been increasing, which correlates with our first argument in the very first claim, that the number of LAPD shootings is increasing as well. So we can see that that a decrease in the use of deadly force can also relate to a decrease in crime. Thank you.